Good evening all and welcome. If Bigfoot is staring at you in the cemetery while you're in the cabin, do you hide in it? Or do something else? Well, most of you said that you'd hide in the cabin, so we had cabin stories. I think this is an interesting way to do polls, and if you guys like it, we'll carry on doing them this way for a bit of fun. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My parents own a small cabin in the middle of the woods, on about 60 acres of land in upstate New York, rural Sullivan County to be a bit more precise. We call it, rather appropriately, the camp. The small cabin at the camp is nicely nestled in the middle of the woods. There's a mile-long dirt road surrounded by woods that leads to a small dirt lot and a small yard in front of the building. We use this road to get to and from the camp. Behind the cabin is a clearing that is about 350 yards long and 60 yards wide. The clearing consists of the backyard, the garden, and the end of the yard, and a small field directly behind it. Other than that, the rest of the property is all woods. Woods that we have explored thoroughly, but a vast amount of woods nonetheless. The cabin is made up of only 2 rooms, with one room used as the bedroom and the other used as the living area. There is only one inside wall within the cabin, and its simple purpose is to divide the 2 rooms. Other than that, the 2 rooms are completely open. The cabin had simple furnishings. In the bedroom there was a bunk bed, a sofa couch, and in the living area there was a love seat, a sofa couch, a wooden stove, 2 dressers, a coffee table, a rocking chair, and a small TV. That's it. No kitchen, no bathroom. We used a gas-powered generator to run the few lights and outlets within the cabin, as well as the TV. We had a VCR hooked up to the TV and would occasionally watch movies on VHS or DVD. For those concerned about the bathroom situation, there was an outhouse about 30 yards from the cabin. To cook, we either used the wood stove inside the cabin or the propane grill on the small porch overlooking the backyard. The cabin has multiple windows. There is a fair-sized window that allows us to view the front yard. Another fair-sized window on the side of the building that gives us a view of the woods, and a large picture window at the rear end of the cabin that gives us a view of the backyard, garden, and field. These windows are all in the living area. There are 2 small windows in the other room of the cabin, but they are not relevant. Myself, my younger brother by about 3 years, and my mother and father spent just about every weekend at the camp when we were younger. Simply put, we grew up in the woods and were certainly no strangers to the outdoors. With that being said, I've had my fair share of experiences, most of which had logical explanations. However, the event you're about to hear stands out, because to this day, not one of us can explain it. This took place in summer of 2008. I was 9 years old at the time. It was a perfectly normal Saturday in June. My brother and I carried out a normal routine of riding 4-wheelers, playing outside, catching frogs and salamanders. Nothing out of the ordinary throughout the day, as you would expect. Towards the evening, it started getting a bit chilly. So my brother and I decided to call it a day and head inside the cabin for the night. I gassed up and started the generator, and we went inside for the evening. Once inside, I filled up the wooden stove and started the fire to get some heat going, as it was going to be a rather chilly night. My dad had just finished grilling the usual chicken, potatoes and burgers as he brought the food inside at around 7 p.m. We all ate and relaxed for a little while to let our food settle. The sun had just started to set. Fast forward about half hour and I started to get bored. My mother then reminds me that she had brought my plug-and-play Wheel of Fortune game with us to play. I excitedly went and plugged the RCA cables into the TV and set up the game. The TV was situated just to the left of the big picture window at the rear end of the building. It was dusk at this point. By dusk I mean it was getting darker, but there was still plenty of light to see outside. It was about 8:30 p.m. at this point, in upstate New York. It isn't pitch black outside until around 9:30 in the middle of summer, so there was still plenty of light out. We'd been playing Wheel of Fortune for a few minutes at this point. I was sat just a few feet away from the TV in a rocking chair. My mother handed me the game back for my turn when it happened. Just as I spun the wheel of the game, this extremely bright purple flash of light emitted from just behind me, at the front of the building. I turned my whole body around to see what it was and noticed that my parents and brother had done the same. I immediately noticed that the front yard was engulfed in this extremely bright purple light. We all watched as this purple light moved through the front window of the cabin. Once inside, it completely lit up the interior of the building. We all sat motionless, moving, nothing but our heads as this mysterious bright purple light passed by us, then proceeded out the back picture window and into the backyard, lighting up everything in its path. The light then sped off through the yard towards the garden. We watched it pass through the garden, then through the field, and just like that, it disappeared into the woods. This all transpired within a few seconds. I dropped the game as I was in shock, and I turned around towards my parents, and already knowing their answer, nervously asked, "Did you see that?" They nodded, yes, in unison. My little brother ran over to the sofa my parents were on, and sat between them. I quickly followed his lead. In the hours that followed, nothing else happened. That was out the ordinary. I asked my dad what he thought the purple light was, and he told me he didn't know. My mother suggested it may have been lightning, which we all, including her, shut down as soon as the suggestion left her tongue. There was no way that the light was lightning. I have experienced many thunderstorms in my life, even at 9 years old, and no bolt of lightning has ever come close to replicating the appearance of the bright purple light. We all slept in the living area that night, my mother and myself on the sofa, and my little brother and father on the loveseat. We openly talk about that strange purple light to this day, and still not one of us has any idea what we experienced or has experienced anything like it again. We still spend a lot of our free time at the camp, as I mentioned. I have experienced many other things over the years, but never anything like the light. I have researched logical explanations such as ball lightning, and have even researched paranormal phenomena such as orbs, but nothing has ever come close to match the appearance of that bright purple light that seemed to form from nothing. This event happened to me around last summer, and it was probably the scariest story in my life, and I wanted to share it with you. Something I've realized growing up year by year is that the world can be an amazing place, but it is filled with some super sick people, and unfortunately I've seen that side firsthand. I am a very social person, and love the opportunity to hang with friends whenever I can. I'm also the type of person who is always looking for the next big thing. I guess I should tell you, I was 18 years old, male at the time of this story, and have a decent-sized friends group of both boys and girls. Throughout high school, we had done a lot of crazy stuff together. Being just out of high school, we wanted to do something insane before making our ways for college, and we all decided to go camping in the middle of nowhere for 3 days, for fun, and, for some miracle, all our parents thought it would be fine. So we had 6 people going: me, my girlfriend Stephanie, my friend Brandon and his girlfriend Kaylee, and Steven and his girlfriend Sarah. We had decided to have 3 different tents for each couple. The reason you could probably guess. Being a former Boy Scout, I was aware on everything we needed to survive for the 3 days: food, water, and other essential supplies. Being the rebellious teenagers we were, we also stocked up on plenty of booze, as well as a bit of the green stuff for our fun getaway. So mid-July, we departed for our camping vacation. After hours of driving and driving down back roads, we eventually found a place that looked secluded, but not sketchy, like some horror stories. There were houses near, but not too close, and again, we weren't looking for a sketchy woods to camp. But unfortunately, there was no service. It took us about an hour to get everything set up. While the girls and Steve finished setting up camp, Brandon and I took a look around while fetching firewood. We eventually came across a cool-looking trail. We weren't too concerned because there weren't houses within a mile radius, and we assumed that those people had used these trails to hunt, which was big in this area. If you're wondering about our car, we drove a Honda Pilot, which was Steve's, that had plenty of room for us and our supplies. We parked the car right close to the site, so we had eyes on it at all times. The first night nothing much happened. We rolled a blunt, drank a bit, and called it a night. The next day we decided to explore the woods a bit, but Brandon and Kaylee stayed behind to watch the site and spend time together. We decided to go down the path we found earlier. Around 20 minutes down the path, Steve spots a metal fence. We approach it to find a cemetery. The cemetery looked old, but there were signs of activity there. And no, not voodoo or cults or anything like that. We mean flowers and notes. And beyond the cemetery we saw a bigger trail that had tire tracks and a half-assed parking lot for the cemetery. We ventured down the path a bit more to spot some deer, then head back because it's getting late. That night we really partied hard because we were to leave the next day and didn't want to return with extra beer nor the green stuff. Now this is the night that was the polar opposite of the other. The other night was peaceful and we assumed the same about this one. But boy were we wrong. Now, you would assume there would have been warning signs earlier in our trip, like a rusty knife on our path or foot tracks around our site. Nope, not at all. All of us woke up to a blood-curdling scream coming from Steve and Sarah's tent. We all heard the fabric being ripped by what we assumed to be something sharp. I guess Steve hit the guy really hard with his flashlight and was able to get both him and Sarah to the car. Now, here's the issue. Steve's tent is closest to the car, while the other 2 tents are closer to the trail. So to get to Steve's car, we had to get past whatever attacked Steve and Sarah. Luckily, all our drunken selves were gone before getting into his car as he yelled cemetery, and it clicked in my head. The trail on the other side of the cemetery. So I quickly grabbed Brendan, Kaylee, and Stephanie and start running to the trail. I used my phone flashlight to help me see. You might think why you would turn on your flashlight. Well, the last thing I wanted to do was to miss the cemetery and be lost in the woods with the guy who attacked Steve. Well, by the time we get to the trail, Steve and Sarah had gotten the hell out of there from the site, and we could hear the guy chasing us from several yards behind. We were able to find the cemetery rather easily. I hopped the fence first, and when we all get over, we notice Steve has not arrived yet, so we all hid in the cemetery. Luckily, to our advantage, it was pitch black by the time I turned my flashlight off, and we all hid in complete silence. My heart dropped when I heard the metallic shaking as if someone was climbing over the fence. The guy had tracked us down, probably due to the fact that Steve had yelled cemetery. We all stayed still as we heard the ground crunch as the guy took slow steps. When in fight or flight mode, you're capable of a lot more than you would think. Your brain puts on some high power alert stuff. The guy approached, and I realized I had my small Swiss Army knife in my pocket. As the guy's steps grew closer to me, when he was right about on top of me, I grabbed my utility knife and stuck it behind his leg. The guy tumbled to the ground with a shriek of pain and a metallic sound as he dropped his weapon. As soon as the pair of headlights came around the corner, Steve had made it, and we all ran to the car. While I got up, the light gave me a glimpse of the guy. He was tall, bulky, and had the look of pure hatred in his eye as he clutched the back of his knee, and by his side, a huge machete. I was the last one to get in the car, and before I fully closed the door, we floored it out of there. The girls were bawling their eyes out. We drove until the first house, where we politely knocked and asked for directions to a motel. It was a friendly old couple, and they told us there wasn't one for miles. They took us in and gave us warm food and a place to rest for the remainder of the night. In the morning, the man brought his hunting rifle with us to retrieve our stuff from our campsite. When we got there was nothing stolen, but all our tents were slashed up. The elderly woman called and made a report while we were gone, and when we got back to their home, the officers were there, and we gave them our statements. The officers said there wasn't enough evidence to find the guy, but they promised to search. We headed home later that day. No one said a word on the way home. We were all processing what really happened. The police sadly never found the guy. College split us up a bit, but we barely talk about it as a group since it's been a while. My advice for you all: find yourself a populated place to camp. I don't care if it's some Yogi Bear camp. Be in reach of help and the police. Stay safe, guys. Please. I live in rural Appalachia and adore the wilderness. I often invite friends to come out and camp with me. One, because I enjoy sharing the wilderness with people close to me, and two, because there's a creature that lives in my woods. A couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5, my aunt bought a small cabin from the Amish and placed it there. She intended it to be used as a playhouse for my younger cousin, but my cousin never enjoyed it and could never stay a full night there. The weekend off of school came around, and I called out my friend to see if he'd like to stay in the woods with me for the weekend. He agreed and had his mum bring him out. We started walking and made it not even halfway to our destination when he asked if we could just stay in the new cabin for a night or two, because the weather said it was going to storm anyway. So we walked back to the top of the hill so that I could text my aunt, and she gave me the okay. It was starting to get dark, so we went ahead and settled down completely in the cabin and started eating what was supposed to be camping rations. We spoke for hours until we looked out the window and noticed it was getting dark and the rain was coming out. We decided it was best to lay down and get to sleep. He passed out almost instantly, leaving me alone in pitch darkness listening to the sound of heavy rain hitting the tin roof. I didn't even realize I fell asleep until I heard a loud knocking and rattling on the door and figured my buddy went out to pee or something. The door had a large window and I could clearly see someone standing there. I was dreading having to crawl out the blankets into the slightly moist, cold air to let him in after he somehow locked himself out. So I rolled over to prepare to stand up, and I was facing his bed, which I couldn't really make out a shape 100% from, but as I forced my eyes I could tell he was still in it. I froze and was in pure terror for what seemed like at least an hour, when I heard the thing at the door make a sound akin to clearing its throat and running into the woods. I waited at least 20 minutes before asking my friend if he was awake, and he immediately said, "Yeah." "Did you see that thing and hear it too?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Were you awake when it was whispering?" "No," I replied. We lay there too scared to move or make a sound above a whisper for hours. I would start drifting off and almost immediately would start hearing something tap on the windows, but I would try my best to ignore it, even when I could clearly hear something rubbing its finger on the edge of the tin roof on my side of the cabin. Morning came, and I felt like death. My body didn't feel as bad and apparently thought the figure was a dream. But he quickly realized that it couldn't be, the more details that I brought up. We packed up and started to make our way back to my house. Halfway up the hill to my house, I realized the scariest part of everything the night had to offer was that we never locked the door. The rest of the way up my hill was spent with me constantly looking over my shoulder down at the cabin. To this day, I haven't spent another night in it or gave it a glance for longer than 2 seconds on my way to the woods. Midsummer's Eve about 10 years ago. Me and my ex-significant other were planning on spending a romantic weekend at his mother's childhood home, which was now serving as a summer cottage. The cottage was located on a tiny island, and in order to reach it you had to first leave your car by the road. It was really remote, so this could be done. Then walk about 2 kilometers through the woods and finally row a boat across a small river. When we reached the cabin, we found the key to the front door was missing. I was already feeling like there was something out of place, but decided I was probably just a bit tired from the journey. My then significant other was really skinny and long, so he managed to wiggle his way through a window and find the door from inside. We then proceeded to unpack our stuff and got a fire going to warm up the sauna, a must on midsummer around here. My ex told me we were going to sleep in the first room on the left, the old master bedroom, and I went in to make the bed ready for us. As I entered, I was at once hit by a strong feeling of dread. We were not welcome there. I tried to shake it off because I didn't want it to ruin our weekend, so I said nothing about it to my ex. We decided to have a bite to eat before going to the sauna, and as we were eating I noticed my ex started to look a bit pale. When I asked him if he was doing okay, he told me he was feeling really ill all of a sudden, and there was a sudden chill that was going through him constantly. I put my hand on his forehead. He was clearly running a high fever. He was feeling fine just before, so we were both a bit puzzled by his sudden unwellness. We thought it would be best for him to rest for a while, so we went into the bedroom to lie down. I wasn't thrilled about going in there, but it was the only place with a bed at the time, so we really had no choice. I remember very vividly what happened next. We were lying on the bed, my ex with his eyes closed and breathing heavily, sickly warmth pouring from him like crazy, and me very much awake and alert. It began as a cold feeling of dread, just like before, but this time it kept escalating to the point of pure fear. My heart was pounding faster and faster as I realized we were in the middle of nowhere. We had no phone, and my ex was the only one who could even drive. Then I saw it in the doorway. A shadowy figure, clearly male, was standing on the doorstep. It was leaning towards us, radiating hate. It seemed reluctant to step all the way in, but made sure I knew if it chose to do so. There was no other way out of the room except through the window, but that was sealed shut. I mustered all my strength, shook my ex by the shoulder and explained to him that we had to leave now. He was still very weak, but I managed to get him up and packing. The figure was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished when I focused on getting my ex to his feet. So we packed up in a hurry and left. I told my ex I had felt and seen something strange, but mainly I explained our haste with the fact that he was ill and we needed to get back to civilization while he was still able to travel. But what do you know? By the time we had left and crossed the river, he was feeling a lot better, and his fever was all but gone. We reached the car, and he mentioned something about maybe going back now because he was feeling okay, but I quickly refused. We drove back to his parents' house, where there was a small midsummer family gathering taking place. People asked why we returned so soon, but I didn't say anything to anyone about what had happened, only that we came back because he was feeling ill. We had a few drinks, chatted with his relatives, and everything seemed to be going back to normal. So much so that I started to doubt myself. Had I really even seen something? I must have been overreacting, imagining things. Then my ex's uncle speaks up. "By the way, did you know that the old place is haunted?" I felt my stomach curling up with fear as if I'd swallowed an ice cube stone. "Yeah, it really is. I remember my dad telling me about it. He said that even before he was born there were strange things happening down there all the time, according to his own father. Then one day a weird old man appeared at the door and said he was there to help, and proceeded to draw lines across the yard with some kind of metal wire while chanting silently to himself. When the guy was finished, he said he had reconducted the energy flow around the house so that the house would from now on be left untouched by evil, then went on his way. I remember all this when my brother said he had done some landscaping at the cottage and removed a bunch of old wire that was running on the ground. I wonder if the ghost is back now. I heard he really likes to frequent the master bedroom. Isn't that where you guys were sleeping?" He laughed heartily at his last comment. I just sat there feeling sick to my core. I didn't dare to ask more details about this claimed entity, why it was thought to be there, or what it had previously done to make itself known, but couldn't stop wondering what would have happened had we not left. My mum's side of the family used to have a small cabin in the woods, in the Pocono Mountains, surrounded by trees. But it wasn't like a fancy cabin with a hot tub, more like a very small hunting cabin built by my late grandfather and my uncles. It had a small porch with a picnic bench, a gravel lot to park, and then maybe 15 feet away a nice-sized fire pit with a bench and a few logs around it. The driveway was a very long drive up the side of the mountain, off a very secluded highway. The house was small, but the land they owned was pretty big. We had a neighbor, but he was maybe half a mile away, maybe a bit closer. We couldn't see them through the woods and rarely heard them except for maybe some gunshots during hunting season. You could hear the occasional car on the highway, but otherwise, the house was kind of in the middle of nowhere. We used to always spend time up there when we were younger, with all our cousins. However, just me and my family would go up there every once in a while in the summer. We would go hiking and visit the local amusement park and have big bonfires and roast marshmallows and cook burgers. At night, we would walk further down the drive towards the highway where the trees weren't as close together so that we could see the stars. Without all the light pollution, you could seriously see everything. It was a great time. Anyway, one summer I was 13. Our family of 5 took a trip up there. My family being me, my 2 older sisters, my mum and dad, and I used to be, and still am, afraid of the dark, and especially the woods. Especially the woods in the dark. So I would really only go outside if one of my siblings or a parent were with me, which they usually were. One night, we lit the bonfire and were talking and roasting marshmallows and enjoying the summer night. I was pretty tired from whatever we had done earlier that day, so I decided to join my mum inside on the couch. I ended up falling asleep in the living room. I woke up a few hours later. Upset, I fell asleep and missed the rest of the fire. I pulled aside the curtains to check if anyone was still outside, and from the window I could see the fire pit clearly still ablaze, and what I assumed was my dad sitting on the bench by himself. Not wanting my dad to be alone, I opted to join him. Now, since I hate the dark, and even though the pit wasn't terribly far, that walk still felt long in the pitch dark. I don't know what possessed me to go outside without looking for any other member of my family, or even check the time. So I opened the door and stepped onto the porch and called my dad to ask him why he was still there. The pit was maybe 15 to 20 feet away, but he should have heard me in the night. I clearly see the fire pit and can clearly see my dad, even though he was sitting on the bench on the opposite side of the fire. Confused, I start to walk down the steps, and then slowly towards the fire pit, asking him why he wasn't responding. As I get closer, I keep calling him, when I realized that while I should be hearing the roar of the fire, there is absolute and complete raging silence. And then I noticed that there is no one sitting by the bench anymore. At this point, I am only feet away from the fire and bench. My blood immediately turned ice cold. I whipped around and sprinted back up the house, not daring to stop or look behind me. I locked the door, ran into my dad's bedroom only to find him there under his blankets asleep. I didn't want him to wake up, to let him know how stupid I was, so I just crawled under the covers beside him and prayed to fall asleep. The next morning I told my parents what happened. My mum keeps telling me it was just a dream, but I woke up from a dream on the couch right before and then went outside and this all happened. I used to have the same recurring dream every time I went to the cabin, and I would only have that dream when I was in the cabin. I specifically remember having this very same dream again, and then waking up on the couch. This same creepy dream is the same reason I always slept next to my dad anytime we stayed at the mountains. I never felt safe sleeping alone. That meant my mum would share a bed with my eldest sister. They both snored, so it was fine. My dad tells me it wasn't possible. One, because he always deadbolts the door before he goes to sleep, and there was no way I would have been able to push the deadbolt open without him waking up. And two, because he always puts the fire out before bed as well, which is basic fire safety. All I know is what I saw, and that it wasn't a dream. Back in September of 2013, I went to North Carolina with my husband, sister-in-law, mother-in-law and her fiancé, soon-to-be father-in-law, to attend my mother-in-law's wedding. We stayed in a very, very cute little cottage in the Smoky Mountains in Franklin, in a cute small neighborhood with decently spaced out houses swerving up a hill on the bottom side of a mountain. We spent a lot of time in Cherokee, at the reservation as well, which was relatively close if I remember correctly, but all of this happened back in Franklin. One evening we were all sat outside the front porch of the cabin decorating wine glasses with paint, while my father-in-law played the guitar. We noted how silent everything in the neighborhood was, no crickets, no birds, no wind. A little later my sister-in-law and mother-in-law went to bed early, and my father-in-law and husband were on the couch in the living room watching TV. I decided to go into the kitchen and make macaroni and cheese. The living room was right next to the kitchen entrance, and the couch my husband was on was the closest to the light switch to the kitchen. While I was draining the noodles, the light suddenly turned off on me. I yelled, "Hey!" and turned around and saw my father-in-law sleeping. I walked into the living room to see my husband sleeping as well. I said his name to wake him up and asked him why he turned the light off on me, thinking he was pulling a prank. He woke up and was visibly drowsy and said he didn't. I told him what happened, and my father-in-law woke up and heard what happened. Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were in their bedrooms still sleeping, and there's no way that they made it past me that fast and turned around as soon as the light went off, as I had a clear view of the living room entrance to the ground floor bedrooms, and the start of the stairs that lead to the upstairs bedroom. My father-in-law and husband came into the kitchen to investigate. We all looked at the light switch, which was in the off position, and my father tried messing with it to see if he could get it stuck in between on and off, to see if maybe that could have been the option. He couldn't get it to work. My husband told me to stop talking about it as they were both getting creeped out, and they both resumed watching TV. Even later that night, while I was sleeping with my husband and sister-in-law in the upstairs bedroom with the AC on, blaring on full blast, I woke up to a blood-curdling scream. I sat up and listened to it for a while and was surprised at just how loud it was, since I could hear it over the AC. I was pretty sure it was coming from outside, and I had to pee badly, so I slowly crept downstairs to the bathroom. I was able to hear the scream much more clearly from there. It was so horrifying I stood there in the bathroom in fear, and after I was done, shaking a little in fear, I realized it sounded like a woman in pure agony. It started out high and by the end got really low, and sounded like at the end of each scream she had to put up with something being ripped from her abdomen, as if each scream physically hurt. About an hour later, it was still going on. And it was only at that point where I gained the courage to go upstairs again. I tried waking my husband, but he's a very deep sleeper, and I had a hard time getting his attention. I knew if I'd have managed to wake him up, he would give me attitude and tell me half asleep he doesn't hear anything over the AC, and to just go back to bed. His sister is a lot like him when it comes to sleep, and she was still knocked out on the bed across the room. I gave up and tried to sleep it off. The bedroom we were in was in the attic. It had a door leading outside with a stairway leading down to the yard. When I was trying desperately to fall back asleep, I couldn't help but imagine a tall, skinny, lean, muscly being with very long limbs standing on the other side of the door. The image haunted me for quite a while, but I somehow managed to fall back to sleep. I don't think that I was necessarily seeing what the thing looked like. I'm just trying to express the amount of fear this thing gave me. I became far too afraid to wake anyone up to investigate whatever it was. I considered someone might be in danger, but it sounded too unreal, almost like it was something pretending to be human. For the past 6 years that happened, I've been trying to figure out what it was that I heard. I looked up YouTube videos of different animals screaming. Foxes, deer, mountain lions, you name it. Nothing was quite like what I heard. The closest thing was a mountain lion, but it would have had to have been a pretty large one on steroids, being an axe murderer or something. If anyone else has had a similar experience or is able to point me to a video with what they think it sounds like, I would appreciate it. There was a really creepy wooden figure of a duck in the living room of the cottage, but all its legs were painted red, and the red paint dripped down its unpainted legs, and its head was on backwards. It had a name tag on it that said, "My name is Melissa," and we all joked that it was trying to scare us. Growing up, I had a neighbor who spent as much time with me as my own family. He also had a son a few years younger than myself, and we were all friends. They lived across the road from us. Behind their house was a heavily wooded ridge with an overgrown road going partially up it. At the end of this road was an old mobile home trailer from the 60s or 70s. It was captured by my neighbor's father, who was a state trooper during a drug raid, and was used as a hunting cabin for many years. At the time of this story, it was in a horrible state of repair, and by no means was probably safe to be in. My neighbor was utilizing it to store random stuff. So one night, I was over at their house as usual, and myself plus my neighbor's son was starting to get bored. At this point it was around 2 a.m. We decided to take the walk up to the trailer and sit there for a bit. So we gathered a flashlight and a small lantern, then headed up. At first things were uneventful. There was a light mist and rain, and it was a bit chilly but not that bad. We sat in the trailer amidst stored items and the decay of the place with the lantern for about 20 minutes, just hanging out and talking. We were discussing leaving when we heard footsteps outside. I have grown up in the woods, and the cadence or rhythm of steps people tend to make compared to animals is noticeable. These were human and heavy. We had heard nothing come up, nor had we seen anything on our way up. At this point, it made its way to the door of the trailer and stopped outside. We called and asked who was there, but there was nothing. No steps, no rustling, nothing. I, at least, had no inclination to be trapped there by anyone or anything, and picked up a rather heavy metal rod that happened to be there, and we whispered a plan. After a second, I kicked the door open with enough force to slam it against the trailer, and almost shut it again while my friend shone the light out. There was nothing there. No sounds of running, nothing at all. We gathered all our courage, hopped out and looked around for a minute. Still nothing to see nor hear. No footprints, no anything. We decided it was best at this point to take our asses back to the house, to which we did. We still didn't see or hear anything on the way back. And I don't know for sure what it was that we saw that night exactly. I am an East Tennessee native and have grown up going to the Smokies. I have also had a strange or seemingly paranormal experience while in the area. So my grandparents own a bunch of rental properties and cabins in Townsend and surrounding the Smokies for holidays, etc. And my extended family would always gather together at these cabins for the holidays. I'd had little things happen here and there, like feeling watched while playing in the woods growing up with my brothers and cousins, or hearing strange inhuman-sounding noises outside at night where there weren't any animals or predation, as I'm very aware and educated on the local wildlife of the Smokies. But nothing super substantial or scary enough that I actually experienced true terror or fear. Mostly just weird little things here and there. Some things being knocked off a table in the cabin or bumps in the night. Anyway, one Christmas around 2010, me and my twin brother were given a cabin to ourselves for the weekend, within a half-mile or so from the rest of the family cabins, and my grandparents' main cabin. We are both 19 at this point, so not little kids by any means. First night there, we drink and I fell asleep early downstairs on the couch, and he passes out in the upstairs bedroom loft. No big deal. Next night he's asleep on the couch, and I'm upstairs in the loft laying in bed. I begin getting the feeling of being watched. Like, not just the little paranoia feeling. It starts off and it builds up to the point where I'm almost in full-blown panic. Now I'm a 20-year-old male at this point, and keep telling myself that I'm just being a coward, and the gut feelings are ridiculous. But the feeling persists. I'm now wide awake looking around the cabin in the pitch darkness for something. I keep seeing movement from the corner of my eye, and just like that, all of a sudden it becomes completely silent, like the Oz effect of whatever other people have called it. I'm laying there heart pounding when I hear something whisper in my ear, "Ree." When I say whisper, it was in a raspy, drawn out tone, but was still startling loud, as if someone was leaning over the bed directly above me saying it into my ear. I jumped up, went downstairs, and fell asleep on the floor beside my brother on the couch, scared like a little kid. We woke up next morning, and my brother was extremely surprised to find me down there with him, but didn't say anything or ask any questions as to why I was curled up beside them on the couch. Within a year later, around Halloween, we were talking with some family and friends about strange experiences, and out of nowhere my brother says to everyone, "Yeah, I definitely think Grandpa's cabins in the Smokies are haunted or something," and goes on to talk about how he had the same weird feeling the night before I slept upstairs in the loft. He's feeling watched, panicked, and all the same feelings as me. He, like myself, couldn't really even verbalize the feeling of being watched by something malicious well. I kinda yell in excitement about having the same gut feeling there, but that's when he realizes the reason the next night why I was asleep on the floor next to him. But afterwards I did confide in him embarrassingly. I might add that to this day I have no idea what happened in those cabins. My grandparents sold them all and we haven't been back. It was strange and weird. My personal opinions is that something to do with the energy from the mountains, the energy from the Native Americans who lived there for centuries before us. I believe the entity that spoke to me was purely malicious. Context. I was 17 when this happened. I'm female, and spoilers, I'm a lot more savvy now than I used to be. I was 17 and had just started a relationship with a guy who I thought was the world. Turns out he cheated on me several times and was no good for me. My parents warned me off. They told me he was a loser and a bum. You see, he was 27, so a lot older than me, had dropped out of high school and had pretty much been homeless for a long time. He and I met through mutual friends at a party, and we really hit it off, and I thought he was the love of my life. Oh, to be 17. In any case, he told me to run away from home, that my parents didn't understand our love, and that we should be free to do whatever we pleased. It didn't matter that I was still going to school. He convinced me with his sweet words, and off I ran. We were gone for about 3 weeks when this happened. Life had already started to seem quite bleak. Being homeless was nowhere near as glamorous as he made it out. Sleeping rough, having to struggle for food, and he rinsed the little money I had in my bank account relatively quickly. He told me of a cabin that he knew, right near the edge of the woods. He said that he had rented it off the owner before, and that they went way back. I, totally smitten, agreed with the proposal. It would be nice to have a roof over our heads. Truth be told, I was starting to miss my parents, but I was still blindsided by love. He took me to the cabin, which was about a 4-hour walk, and when we finally got there, it was heaven compared to how rough I'd been sleeping. To think I'd finally be able to shower. We got there. It was lovely. The only problem was that we didn't have a key. He told me that the guy had left it somewhere for us to find, but hadn't specified, and since he'd only contacted him through a payphone, as he didn't have a cell phone, well, then there weren't many options. We started rummaging around the little path that led up, checking for fake rocks, under rocks, in bushes, buried in mud, and all the like. We looked for about 2 hours, and I was starting to get less and less convinced that this was true, and getting angry at my boyfriend for this. But he told me not to worry and that we will find it soon. He really did have a way with words. I grew tired of looking for the key, and went and looked at the house itself, did a perimeter check, and found that one of the upstairs windows was a little bit open. If I stood on my boyfriend's shoulders, I might be able to just touch it and crawl in perhaps. Well, after falling down twice, I just about managed to prop it open with a stick and climb my way in. It was plenty big enough for me to go through, which I was very grateful for. The cabin itself was simple enough. I got in on the upstairs part, let's call it the attic I suppose, of the cabin. It was a very nice bedroom, and I made my way down and unlocked the door. One of the things I realized when I got down is that it had 2 different locks, so even if we would have found one key, we still wouldn't have been able to get in. I was wondering at this point if my boyfriend's testimony was true. But, trying to think the best of him, I unlocked the door and let him inside. We spent a really comfortable few days in the cabin. It was absolutely charming, just to be at one with nature. He was into yoga and a whole host of other interesting things as well, and at one point when he went out to get the green stuff, I was left there by myself, just trying to relax and calm down. While I was waiting all alone, as my boyfriend had already been about 3 hours at this point, I started looking around and found a book. I perched myself in the little living area on a chair and started reading, feeling quite happy with myself. That's when I see a car pull into the driveway. A really nice fancy looking car too. 4 people get out of the car. They all look about 25 to 30, with an assortment of camping and trekking gear. They start opening the door with keys, and when they open it, I give them a funny look and ask them what they think they're doing. They give me an equally puzzled look and ask me the same thing. At this point, there was no genuine confrontation, but I was starting to get afraid. But, confident that my boyfriend hadn't lied to me, and that he had in fact booked the cabin, I told them that we had booked the cabin for the week, and that my boyfriend knew the owner, and that there must be a mistake with their reservation. They told me that they had just received the keys from the owner himself, who lived about a mile away, and that there was no way he'd already booked it out. He was some 40-year-old guy, no way his memory was falling apart just yet. We gave each other quizzical looks. The guy asked where my car was, and I, not wanting to sound like I had walked here, told him that my boyfriend had gone out in the car and that he'd be back shortly. I didn't really know what else to say from embarrassment. So, with a defeated look, he said, "Come on, get in my car and we'll drive down to the owner and see him." At this point, I was about soiling myself. As the confidence of these guys grew, I started to get more and more confident that my boyfriend was perhaps full of garbage and had lied to me completely, and that we had broken in and used the resources of someone else's cabin, and the guilt was weighing me down. I told him that wouldn't be necessary, that I would go speak to the owner myself when my boyfriend got here, and that perhaps we were assigned another cabin, and were given this one by mistake. That was quick thinking on my part. I didn't even know if there were any more, but the guy kind of shrugged it off and asked if in the meantime they could set up, as he was fairly confident that they were going to use this cabin. So I said sure, went upstairs and gathered our small 2 tattered backpacks and came back down. It was awkward and uncomfortable reading the book there, and at that moment is when I hear laughter coming from down the hill. I jump out the door and see my boyfriend and a few of his homeless buddies coming up. Looks like they were coming to stay as well. They had a lot of their stuff, one of them pulling a duvet behind him. When he gets to the top, he sees the car and asks where it came from. I told him that some guys were here to rent the cabin, and sweetly said that we should go check with the owner, who lives only a mile away, to see what the mix-up was about. He gives me a deadpan look and says that there must have been a mistake and la la la. That's when I catch him out. I could tell in his eyes that he had no idea that this was already rented out by someone else, and that he had basically forced me to go in and break into a cabin. I was mortified. He tells me that we'll be fine and starts leading me down the hill and tells me that there's another cabin and there must have been a mix-up. I grab my backpack, very upset. But there was something off about my boyfriend. It was like the fact that I had challenged him that had really irritated him. Him and his buddies were starting to display a lot more bravado than usual, and I was getting uncomfortable. They were telling nasty jokes, saying nasty words and calling me names, all banterously, apparently. That's when they got to a little brook. My boyfriend then looked at me dead in the eyes and slapped me in the face. I was shocked. No one had ever hit me like that before. Just when I was about to say what I thought of him and give him a piece of my mind, did I feel 2 hands push me square in the chest, and I fell straight, backpack and all, into the brook. He said that I should never speak to him that way, and called me all manner of horrible things, said that I needed to learn my lesson, and him and his buddies laughed heartily and walked further into the woods. I dragged myself out of the water, crying, clueless as to where I was and where they'd gone, with little intention of following them. So I did the only logical thing. I went up to the cabin and spoke to the guys who were in there, told them the truth, that I'd run away from home, that my homeless boyfriend was a piece of work who I was pretty much done with now, and that I really would appreciate a ride home as I had no idea where I was or what I was doing. I was lucky enough that the girlfriend gave me a lift home, Turns out I was only 40 minutes away, lucky for me. My parents gave her money for gas and a little extra and thanked her when I got home safe. Something important to note is that I had actually left my cell phone in the house, as I didn't want to be part of my parents' system or use anything they had given me, other than clothes, when I left with him. That was part of his doing. I'm glad to say that I learnt my lesson about going and getting in with the wrong crowd, and my life has gone pretty well since then. One thing, I never saw him again, but I did read about him in the local paper a few years back. He apparently had gotten into a lot of trouble with some dangerous people and was on the run, and his mugshot was also available in some shops for petty theft. Looks like he never straightened out. Shame, really. Back in October of 1989, my mother and I went up to the western part of North Carolina for a week to see the leaves change color. We rented a cabin which was owned by the cousin of my brother's former high school band teacher who had retired several years earlier. The band director was more or less keeping watch over the place. He lived down the street, but it wasn't until Friday afternoon that we saw him. The cabin was somewhat in the wilderness, but it was near a main road. The band director had to go away for the weekend and was letting us know. We had the number of his cousin in case we needed any help. This was on Friday afternoon. Up until that time, the trip had been uneventful. Friday evening we went to a church dinner which was down the road. When we came back home it was already dark, and my mum started thinking about that we were the only ones on this road and we didn't know the nearest neighbour, which was a little unsettling. The moon wasn't full, but there was a light to it. We had separate rooms in the cabin. The power went out in the cabin shortly after we came home from the church dinner. Then my mother heard what sounded like footsteps, and she saw what appeared to be the outline of a hat. There was a man walking around near the cabin. Then we saw this hat disappear by the woods. By this time both of us are terrified that the man is going to come into the cabin and harm us. Both of us wondered if he had cut the power source, and I decided to sleep in the bed which was under my mother's room. We tried to sleep, and then were awoken by an owl howling. My mother could see the owl's eyes which were looking into the window. The drape couldn't be closed the entire way, and the owl didn't take its eyes off my mum the entire night. The owl also hooted all night. My mother tried to ignore the owl, but its presence really unnerved her. The eyes really unnerved me. Neither of us could sleep, as every noise jarred us. It would be like, "What's that? What noise is that?" Every once in a while we would see the outline of the hat walking around the general area. Then it would go off into the woods. Both of us were freaked out at this point, but we weren't able to leave in the middle of the night. There were no phones in the cabin, and this was long before cell phones were in common usage. The power finally did come back on several hours later, or so it seemed. We were in the wee hours of the morning. Originally we were going to leave on Sunday, but left as soon as the sun came up on Saturday. A few days later my mother got a call from the band director. Apparently the man we saw was a mountain man, who was a handyman and had been trying to get the power back on for us. He was harmless, but neither the band director or his cousin had told us that he lived out in the woods. We hadn't seen this guy until Friday night when the power went out. Had we learned that, we wouldn't have left on Saturday. He had told the band director that we left a day early. We could laugh about being scared. It was a memorable night after all. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I did really enjoy these cabin stories. I think I'll try and do some nature-y themed stuff this week if we have enough. So you can pretty much guarantee that we should be having some cool stories this week. So be sure to stick around for those, if you are so inclined. If there's a story of something that's happened to you that you would like to share, you can send it to my email or post it to my Reddit. Either are fine, and links to both can be found within the description itself. Also, Feel free to check me out on Patreon if you'd like some cool rewards, which brings me to thank all my wonderful patrons for signing up and their generous contributions. It really means a lot. So, if you'd like to be a part of the Patreon group, check the link out. Thanks, guys. But for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.